Hi, this time we're going to review in this tutorial a way to play for the left hand in the jazz piano. It's very obvious that when we hear a jazz piano, we know that the right hand is playing the melody or making a solo, an improvisation, or even making some arrangements with the harmonies, helping the left hand. But when we are trying to think what we can do with the left hand, it's a little confusing. So I'm going to show you some variations of different ways we can play, depending if you're playing with other musicians, as a typical jazz trio with a bass, an acoustic or an electric bass, or even a rhythmic section for like drums, or if you're playing along with the piano. There are different styles you can apply or techniques. First of all, we're going to review the things we can do when we're playing with a bass and a rhythm section. We're going to review a 4-chord progression that we're going to see with major, minor, dominant sevens, and diminished chords. These 4 chords are the basic chords of almost any song you can find in any kind of music, popular music, and the jazz music is not an exception for this example. So let's review first of all the progression we're going to be using. It's going to be in the key of C. The first chord is going to be a C, it's a major chord. Then we're going to play a C sharp diminished. Then we're going to move to a D minor, and then to a G dominant 7, and starting again from the C. And these 4 chords, we already have majors, diminished, minors, and dominant 7s. The 4 chords, the 4 basic chords for any song. And now let's see what we're going to play with the left hand. Obviously, the jazz music has some things using more harmonies than regular music, so it's not usual you to play this kind of chords when you're playing jazz music. So we're going to add some harmonies here. In a major chord, you usually can play a major 7, which is a semitone, a 1/2 step back from the octave of the root key. In the major chords, you use major 7. You can add also the 9. And if you're playing with a bass, the bass is already playing the root note, so you can take it out from your harmonization and stay just with these notes for the chord of C major. Then we move to a C sharp diminished. The diminished chord doesn't need too much harmonization because by itself sounds great. So you just have to move the inversion to have a more comfortable fingering depending on the previous chord you were playing. So let's move some notes here. The C sharp, we're going to move it 1 octave up, and also the E here. So we're going to stay with this inversion for the C sharp diminished. This was the C sharp diminished. It's very close. Then we're going to play the D minor, which is going to be playing also with the dominant 7. It's a whole step before the octave. All the minor chords usually play the dominant 7 note. And we can also play the 9 and taking out the root note that is going to be played by the bass. So we stay with these 4 notes for the D minor. So C, C sharp diminished, D minor, and at last we're going to review the G7. It's a dominant 7. Obviously, the chord by itself is playing the dominant 7, which is a whole step back from the octave of the root note. And we add also the 9 and the 13. This is a very nice chord for the dominant 7s. And now we have to move some notes here to have a more comfortable fingering here. We're checking out the E and playing in this octave. We're going to take out the A and playing here in this octave, and even move the 7th to this octave. So we stay with this chord, and obviously we can take out the root note that is going to be played by the bass and stay with this chord for the G7. You can take even the 5th, just playing the 13 here. And as you can notice, the difference between the D minor and the G7 is just 1 note, moving the C to the B. I already gave you all these explanations so you can understand, not just as easy to tell you to move one finger, because you have to know what you are playing, not just playing because you saw somebody making that and you don't know what's the harmonic structure of this. So C major, C sharp diminished, D minor, and G7. Now this first part we're going to play with the bass and the drums. We're going to play just at the same beat that it's played the music. You know that some variations can be made in the beats, but in the jazz music, but here we're going to play the first time just in beats at the beat, just to understand how it's going to be sound. Now that we already know how it's going to be the beat of the harmonization, now we're going to make some variations in the chords. That is very usual to play this in the jazz music. You can play your chord at the beat, but you can also play a little bit before or even after the bass and play with some notes or some harmonies while you are in that chord. So if you're with the C, you can play also with the sixth, which is an A. When you move it to the A, C sharp diminished, you can play these two notes with the F. When you're in the D, you can play obviously with the D. And when you are with the G, you have a very nice option that is this chord. You can play with this both chords and getting back to C. So now let's play one more time the same with the same rhythm, but with the variations in time and with playing with some harmonies. So this is the basic way you can play with the left hand when you are playing with the rhythm and a bass. Now let's see what are the options or the variations that I have with a piano when I'm playing alone. Obviously you don't have the bass notes that you had previously with the instrument, so you have to play it by yourself with the left hand. The easiest way to do that, this technique was played by several decades, is to play first the root note in the bass, and after that with the same hand to play the harmonies. Here is the example for the C, C sharp diminish, D, and G, and you can play at the beat you want. You can also play with the notes that we already reviewed. Obviously the beat is going to be played by the bass, and you can also make the variations in the time with the harmonies. You can even play with your right hand the things that we were playing previously with the left hand. If you can't move too quickly, but it is usually played with somebody singing or making a melody or making a solo, and you are just making something else. Now, another thing you can do, it's if you're playing with your right hand a solo or harmonization or even a melody, and you don't have the ability to play the bass and the root note and the harmonization, you can make something that is very useful also and used a lot in a lot of jazz musicians, is to play just the root note with one harmonization, that is usually the 7. So here in this example, in the C, we already know that the 7 is a major 7. You just can play this. It is very comfortable to play the octave because we are very used to play the octaves in a lot of popular music, but here is going to be the exception in the jazz because you shouldn't play an octave because it sounds very normal. So you can get used to play the 7th. So you can play it in this octave, you can play it in another octave, but be careful because sometimes the chords are getting with too many bass notes, and you can't distinguish correctly the key. So just be careful to know when you can put it. So when you're playing a solo, or when you're making an harmonization, or even when you're playing a melody. So this is the way you can play a C. The C sharp diminished, we are going to be playing the first note, and here we are not going to be playing a 7th. We are going to be playing the 6th or the last note of the chord. Remember, this is the chord. We're playing the first note and the last note. C, C sharp diminish, and the D we're going to play at the root note and the dominant 7, which is a whole step, or even play it in the octave, in an octave down. This is very useful when you're playing blues. This is resource very useful. And the G finally, we play it also with the dominant 7. So C, C sharp diminish, D, G, and this is the way you can make your own harmonization with a nice sound without just playing just the root note or the octave. So these are a lot of variations where we review. Try to practice them all. You can also visit my webpage where you can download the rhythm I use at the beginning to play the variations with the rhythm section and the bass. And I hope you like it, and see you at the next one.